Working for you. A weekly talk radio program which highlights developments of national interest and the activities of your St. Kitts Nevis government. Join host Lesroy Williams as he presents news, views, reports, and interviews about everything regarding the activities of the Team Unity government and the building of our communities and the development of St. Kitts Nevis. Tune in and call in to interact with your government and share your views regarding the upward forward development of your community and our beautiful Twin Island Federation. Working for You is weekly, every Wednesday live from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on ZIZ Radio, Win FM, and Sugar City FM with rebroadcast on participating stations. Working for You.
Good afternoon, and I welcome you to this Working for You program. Today, which is the 5th day of July 2017. I am Lesroy Williams, your host. Today I have two esteemed guests with me from the Ministry of Education. I have with me Mr. William Vincent Austin Hodge. I get it right this time. He is the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education. And I have with me Dr. Tricia Esdale, who is the Chief Education Officer. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And today we are going to be speaking about, of course, a lot of issues pertaining to the Ministry of Education, what is happening within the Ministry of Education. However, before we start, I want Dr. Esdale. This is your debut on this program. It's your first time that you're here. And I would like you to tell the audience something about yourself, your professional background, your area of expertise, so that they can know who Dr. Esdale is.
Okay. Let me begin by saying that I am the Acting Chief Education Officer. I have held that post for 2 years now. We made 2 years in May. Prior to that time, I was the Senior Education Officer within the Ministry of Education. I took up that post in August of 2010. So this August will make 8 years with the Ministry of Education. In terms of my background or training, I am actually a fully qualified and trained psychologist. That is my primary background. All of my degrees, so bachelor's, master's, and PhD are in that area of specialization. During my master's work, I would have had a clinical focus, so that would have lent itself to doing therapeutic intervention with various populations. Within my PhD training, I was trained as an experimentalist, and so my focus in that area is in that of research and research development. And my area of specialization was in the field of behavioral neuroscience. In joining the ministry in 2010, when I took up the post, I was charged with responsibility for the development of programming in schools. I would have coordinated things like our guidance and counseling program. I would have been charged with things like the development of anti-violence programming for schools and things of that nature. And I've also been given special responsibility for developing programming and sourcing funding through NGOs to support the work of the ministry that might be outside of what fits within our national budget.
Okay. Now, a lot of what you spoke about, you said that your undergrad, your master's and your PhD is in the area of psychology.
Yes, it is.
So it's not really in education. How do you link those?
Well, with gaining a PhD in psychology, I would have said that I was trained as an experimentalist. So in psychology, we have two branches. One is applied and one is
Yes.
experimental.
Sure.
Those who undergo training experimental are expected to go into the field of academia. That means that we are expected to graduate from our programs and go into the field of teaching, instruction, research, and student development. So coming out of that background, I was equipped to develop students, to teach students, and would have done so at the college level before returning home. So education was always going to be my home, coming out of the experimental branch of psychology. In returning here, certainly I had an interest in things that lent itself more to program development and research, and that's why I was charged with much of that responsibility while acting as senior education officer.
Sure. Thank you. Now, P.S. Hodge, you're a veteran in education. I think that is what you would have done all of your life.
Certainly.
Am I mistaken?
No, absolutely. That's what I would have. That's what I did, and if I have to live my life over again, I would do the same thing.
Right. Now, you were on this program a few weeks ago.
Yes.
And you did indicate that you will be back. And now you're back.
Yes, I
So you
am.
have kept your word.
Yes, sir.
Education is something that is ongoing. And, there are changes, all the time in education. There are new initiatives and so on that are in education and within the Ministry of Education itself. Could you tell us what are some of the new initiatives? I know last time you were here, you spoke a little bit about the report card, national report card. Could you tell us a little bit about it and any other initiative that you or Dr. Esdale care to tell us?
Yes, well, I did mention that the new report card was coming on stream, but that's an area that I think I'm going to yield to Dr. Esdale.
Sure.
But before she speaks to that and other new initiatives, I would just like to say that education continues to be a very busy ministry. So even though our schools are winding down to close out the 2016-2017 school year, we are still very busy at the central office and at the Department of Education. We have a number of things happening, which I would speak to in a couple of minutes, but I think I would give Dr. Esdale the chance to talk about the new report card and some other new initiatives.
Sure. Go ahead, Dr. Esdale.
Certainly. So as would have been alluded to, the National Report Card was introduced in 2017 of this year. And I would say it was something a long time coming. It began as part of my work as senior education officer, actually. We were looking at the educational experience of students across the primary school sector and examining end-of-term tests and examining the various report cards because we were looking at assessment and the forms of assessment used in primary school. What we discovered is that there was a high degree of variability school to school. Now, if we were a larger country with large districts and counties, that would be understandable.
Yes.
However, being that we are such a small country, it was not ideal that the experience of a child living in Keon, should their family choose to move to Sandy Point, be so dramatically different. We're in a public education system, which means that there should be some standards across the system with respect to how we report student achievement and the format in which teachers begin to structure assessment throughout the term and during the end of term period. To counter the high degree of variability, we came to the conclusion that it was necessary to create a common template. It meant that for a child and for that child's family, as they move, and quite frankly, I find in the Department of Education, petitions move, and we move quite a bit, that it meant there was a degree of consistency from school to school in how you would be assessed. An A is an A everywhere. The components for language arts are the same everywhere. What is considered the core subjects for assessment are the same everywhere. And before, there was variability. And so the introduction of the report card was intended to reduce some of that.
Okay. So what other initiatives? Are there any other new initiatives?
There are quite a few. I think education is one of the most active ministries, though I'm sure everyone would say that. But I do actually feel that we are a very, very active ministry in terms of new initiatives beyond the National Report Card. There is a push for the development of greater student support services within the ministry. And it's an area in which we have always worked. There is in our primary schools reading intervention teachers throughout our primary schools. There is in our secondary schools learning support. Within our curriculum development unit, we have learning support coordinators and reading coordinators. But as we look at how children are learning and growing, as we look at national test results, as we look at the performance of students in the early secondary school, Forms 1 and 2, we recognize that there is a need to sort of shore up the foundation for children to fill some of the gaps. And it's important that there is effective and strategic remediation for our children. Right now, within our primary schools, we have a culture of what simply would be termed automatic promotion. So you enter and you conclude the year and you move on. But that does not speak to whether or not you are actually ready academically for the work that comes next year. How do we ensure that we do not have a large degree of retention in our schools while making sure that when students do move on, they're ready? And that is what student support is intended to address. So there are currently a few initiatives going on. One of them is a regional initiative in which we are a part of the pilot. It's called the Early Learners Program. And it's been piloted currently in 10 schools and has been piloted in 10 schools this year and will be expanded in this upcoming school year to include roughly 20 schools across St. Kitts and Nevis. And what the Early Learners Program does is focuses on the grades K through 3. And why K through 3? It's very simple. Those are the grades in which children acquire basic literacy skills and numeracy skills, which are the foundation for future success in all other subject areas. It's also the period in time where we can have the greatest amount of intervention and remediation. Early intervention is key. If there is an issue in the way a child learns, if there are issues with respect to learning style or developmental issues, or any sort of challenge that arises, the earlier we can identify it, the earlier we can intervene and work with the teacher and the family. And I say teacher and family because that is key. The more likely we are to have success for those children. And so student support and the Early Learners Program are two things that we're working on avidly within the primary school sector to sort of improve outcomes for children as they exit primary school in 6th grade.
Sure. We speak about student support services, and I know the emphasis, of course, the students are our clients. As teachers, the students are, the clients, and they should be given more focus than anything else. What about support services for teachers?
Right, well, it's good that you raised that because while I didn't speak to it directly, a large part of what the Early Learners Program does is actually focus on the teacher. So right now we have a focal point for the ELP. The focal point for ELP is Ms. Jacqueline Basu, who is the reading coordinator based within the curriculum development unit. But additionally, we have ELP coordinators that work out of the Department of Education here in St. Kitts and in Nevis. And those persons go out to our primary schools and they actively work with the teacher. So the focus for the Early Learners Program is development and support of the teacher in terms of increasing their knowledge and pedagogy with respect to literacy acquisition in the early years. So much of the support is geared at the teacher with the idea that once the teacher improves in skills and knowledge, the effect will trickle down to the student.
Now, you mentioned something earlier on about students moving from one stage to the next and ensuring that we are not just, passing them along through automatic promotion.
Yes.
But sometimes what we have discovered is that when a student has reached a particular level of education, then that is where you start seeing all the weaknesses and so on. And then you start saying, but how it is the student is at this stage, but yet there's basically no critical thinking. It appears that students would have been spoon-fed. Maybe their work was done for them. And so there are many deficiencies sometimes that you actually see.
Yes. You may see deficiencies in a student performance, but there are a variety of reasons for why you might see it. One of the things that we have to recognize is that there are factors that are unique to the student themselves. There are factors that are unique to the teacher, to the school, and to the family. And you have to take all of those factors into account when you're trying to assess a student and why it is they may not be meeting our expectations in terms of grade, age level standards. Certainly, when we look at deficits and we're looking at the whole idea of moving students forward, the challenge for education is how do we intervene on behalf of those students? One of the major challenges that we have right now, I think, in terms of offering remediation is the willingness of families to hear the news. Your child needs help. Your child is not learning. That is very hard news for any parent to hear. Even saying it causes a knot in my stomach. So imagine being a classroom teacher, having to call a parent in and say, your child is not learning. Your child is struggling. I need you to do X, Y, Z in order to ensure their success. Well, that requires that the parent not only hears what the teacher is saying, but truly listens to the fact and then takes action. And oftentimes, our parents are uncertain as to what to do next. So we do have parents who would very much like to then do something, but they're uncertain what to do. We have teachers who, certainly they're classroom teachers, they care, they give of themselves, but not all classroom teachers are trained in special education. So while they will make accommodations for their students, the level of need of the student might exceed what a general classroom teacher is able to do. This is why there is so much focus and interest in the Ministry of Education in developing that sector of student support, because it requires specialists. And we recognize that while we may not be able to put a specialist into every school, we can certainly put specialists into the ministry who can then work within schools and work to develop the skill set of classroom teachers for early identification and referral.
Now, there's a lot of talk these days about child-friendly schools. Now,
Yeah.
I thought that by the very fact that children are going to school, that, the school environment should be one that is friendly for students, and in particular students. So why now you hear a lot of this, this terminology, child-friendly schools, and what does it mean?
Okay. You're not the first to say it. Child-Friendly Schools is an initiative and a framework that's actually worldwide. It's international. It's in every continent. And the Child-Friendly Schools framework that is utilized here in St. Kitts was revised to reflect the values of the Eastern Caribbean. And it is a program that is supported by UNICEF and implemented by local governments. And essentially, when we talk about child-friendly schools, we're talking about taking the focus from the teacher to the student. Now, however, whenever we say this, people get really nervous. They get a little thrown. But all of what we know in education to date, education in the 21st century says students learn best when instruction is student-led, not teacher-led. And through child-friendly schools, what we try to get schools to think about, what we try to get principals, teachers, parents to think about are, what are the conditions under which children learn best? And having identified those conditions, make sure that they're present. What we know is that very often children don't know a lot of things that we assume that they know. And education is about teaching. So we should teach. And that means from basic things in CFS like focusing on teaching appropriate behavior, to teaching the value of hard work, to teaching effective communication. And there's some principles that are embedded in CFS, and some of them include things like being inclusive. And we would say that, well, of course schools are inclusive. I think it's a completely different discussion than we would have here today, but I can talk about the ways in which schools can actually be exclusive if they're not careful. But in CFS, we try to make sure that schools have inclusive practices, that they recognize that simply because a child is in a school and occupies a desk does not actually mean that they're accessing education.
Yeah.
And how do you ensure that they access education? How do you make sure that your school, your classrooms are truly inclusive? Child-friendly schools also looks at things like democratic participation and tries to cultivate this idea that children should have a voice. Again, something that people get a little up in arms about sometimes, and sometimes are taken aback. But when we talk about democratic participation, we're thinking about the fact that we want children to grow into a particular kind of adult. We want children who are what? Critical thinkers. We want children who are able to articulate their thoughts, their feelings. We want children who can advocate for themselves and for others. But how do they develop those skills? They develop those skills by having opportunities for practicing them. And they do that through democratic participation. One example of democratic participation in a school would be student councils. So when we look at child-friendly schools and their various components that we look for, one of them might be, is there a student council present? So that we know that students have at least a mechanism for having a voice, for spearheading projects, and of course they do this under the guidance of a teacher. So it's not that children run amok and run the school, it's that somebody guides them in the process of taking an idea and seeing it through to its realization, of speaking up and finding effective and respectful ways of discoursing with adults about things that matter to them.
Probably as well some cooperative learning strategies.
And of course, yes, I didn't even get into the classroom aspects. But what I will say is this, CFS is a framework. It actually has 11 principles. And I think there's no aspect of a school that will not fall under CFS.
Sure.
Because it really is just a framework for how you run a school, where you put what is in the best interest of the child at the forefront.
Sure. Now, P.S. Hodge, I know recently you know, spoke about the Independence theme competition
Yes.
that was launched, and this year there will be a focus on youth for independence, and the schools are somehow will be intimately involved in the independence celebrations. Could you care to elaborate a little bit more on this?
Yes, certainly. The Ministry of Education was charged with mobilizing our young people to participate in the 34th annual independence celebrations. And one of those charges included managing the independence theme competition. So this was launched probably about a week and a half ago. The deadline is coming up quickly on Friday 14th July. That's about a week and a half to go. And we have gotten many entries already. We would like to encourage more of our students, especially students in high school, to participate. So the word is out there. We are going to work through principals to help them to motivate the students to participate. In terms of the launch, we gave the criteria. I wouldn't go through all of them, but just to remind folks that the theme should be about 6 to 8 words, and it should be concise, memorable, and somewhat give a focus on young people or citizens in general, nationals, residents, and so on.
Maybe you should break down that word concise.
Well, kind of short and spicy, if you wish. There's a word pithy, but many people may not understand what that means. But it's, you know, straight to the point, somewhat catchy, and yet, you know, there's brevity. These entries could be sent to me, the permanent secretary. There are 2 email addresses: independence.theme@gmail.com. I will repeat that: independence.theme@gmail.com, and everything here is lowercase. It can also be sent to my email address. Again, every word is lowercase: william.hodge@moeskn.org. william.hodge@moeskn.org. There's also a box, a very beautifully decorated box that was done by one of our principals, Mr. Jeffrey Hanley. It's located at the entrance of government headquarters, and so persons can drop their entries into that box. I'm certain there are several entries already, so we hope to have a meeting of our subcommittee on the 18th of July, when we would actually deal with the selection of the theme and make a public announcement thereafter. But during the independence celebrations, the month of September, and maybe even a little later, we will be doing a number of events. There would be a night of dance, a night of drama, night of poetry and elocution, a night of, did I say drama? Night
Yes,
of drama.
you did.
Yes, drama, speech, choirs, and such like.
Okay, and that will be the school's participation.
Yes.
In
We
the-
are also encouraging the schools to decorate, you know, the premises and the buildings, make them look like, you know, it's independence, it's nationhood.
Yes.
And I might have mentioned this last time, we are having flagpoles erected at all of our schools to begin to instill that type of patriotism in our students, where the flags would be expected to be raised on a daily basis and lowered in the evening. And there's a protocol we understand for doing this, which we will have to
There is.
educate the students about. So we're really hoping to get the young people more involved, more engaged in celebrating the
Sure.
nation's independence.
Which is so important, huh?
Yes.
Respect for one's country and one's country's symbols and history
Yes.
and all of that
and,
is extremely
and learning the correct stance when we sing the national anthem.
the correct stance and so on.
Yes, I'm seeing a couple of times where I'm visiting schools, and you know, some kids are, you know, not standing properly, and they're fidgeting, or their hands not in the right places, and these are things that we have to instill in them.
I once saw a saying, because some people think that patriotism means that you have to agree with everything in a country. It doesn't mean that. It means, even though my country, I don't agree with everything in my country, it is my country. And I consider it the best.
Of
It is,
course,
it is my
absolutely.
country.
Yes, and
You
we
know?
have to show that love for our country.
Yes.
I think, having lived abroad, we tend to see it more when we get outside of St. Kitts. That, you know, there's that love, that yearning, you know, for what you used to, or what you were accustomed to back home. And so many people, wherever citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis gather in various states in the United States, people will make their way for hours
Yes.
to get there. And it's because that sense of patriotism,
That's
which
right.
they probably developed more having left the
Right,
island.
in the diaspora.
Yes.
Right. Now, school safety. I know that the last program that we had, P.S. Hodge, we touched on it. And we looked at, you know, some of the things that are creeping into our schools. The gang culture. You know, the violence in schools. Maybe some of the coarse talk. And all of that sort of a thing. The challenge to teachers now, that students are posing to teachers and so on. Where are we on this? How are we continuing to mold our children and so on? Because you know the kind of climate we live in now.
Yes. I would say a little bit about this, and then I'll let Dr. Ezil talk about that part of school safety, which is something that we are pushing in conjunction with other Caribbean and international territories as well. We're trying to engage the services of 3 professionally trained police officers who will work with our secondary school students. They would be referred to as resource officers, and they would be working with a program called TAPS. I can't say too much of this yet because we are still in the discussion stage, but it's a way of being proactive in terms of helping our schools to be safer places. These officers have training in dealing and interacting with young persons, and so we are hoping that through these services, some of the safety anxieties that parents and other adults, teachers and so on, that we live these last couple of years and so on, would be reduced. As I mentioned last time, we have security guards at our schools who do regular searches, random searches, using a scanner to help to detect any instruments or weapons, metal instruments that might be brought onto the premises. We saw the need to educate our children and young people about safety, especially within the last couple of weeks when one of our students from the Basse High School unfortunately disappeared, and subsequently her mortal remains were found. And that created a new sense of purpose for us within the Ministry of Education, that we have to call on all adults in the country to be conscious of this type of thing that has begun to happen in our communities. So we're expecting parents to play a very important role here, to begin to sensitize their children to this type of thing, to get them to become more aware that they have to be somewhat responsible for their own safety as well. And this type of thing happening in our society to our young people should cause us to be very outraged. I think every Kittian and Division should be outraged over the tragic death of Leonard Napoleon from the Bastille High School. So in a way, safety has taken on somewhat of a different look for us in the Ministry of Education, but there's also a regular ongoing program where persons are being trained in other aspects of school safety, and I would like Dr. Isdale to talk to that point.
Dr. Isdale.
Certainly. When the Ministry of Education looks at school safety, we do it in a holistic fashion. So while there is that component of school safety that will address matters of school violence, there are also issues of safety that speak to the physical plant itself and its infrastructure, as well as the training and resources that we provide schools in terms of material and the knowledge and skill base that we develop within our teachers. Currently, the Ministry of Education, in partnership with NEMA, USAID, our fire department, our police department, our Red Cross, are developing a comprehensive program for school safety here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Earlier this year, we would have had a training for teachers, and they would have been exposed to information on how to develop effective school safety plans, how to develop school evacuation plans, how to perform and execute drills. We are looking to do more training in this coming year. In addition to continuing work in the area of drills, safety evacuation, and safety plans, we'll also be looking at things like training for personnel in issues of like basic first aid. Additionally, all of this comes together to help part of the larger national work of developing a national school safety policy, which guides the framework for how schools function, how they develop their plans, and how they execute them.
Okay. I think that it is so important that the school, and not only the school, but the church, and, well, the family, of course, is the primary agent of socialization. After that, young people go into a school and they're expected to build on the formation that they would have received at home, and so on. And what you are doing is so important because we have to start from young to inculcate those values and so on in our children. You know, how to deal with conflict resolution, anger management, respect for others, you know? Because a lot of what we are seeing is a lot of all this disrespect. And sometimes I pass on the street and we have school children, and maybe I am at fault too because sometimes I don't even say anything. I hear it and I just don't say anything. But the language is so coarse, the profanities that you hear and so on, and you say, but these are school children. And maybe next time I should stop and say, but your behavior is really not, you know, and so on. So to let them know that this is really not acceptable.
Yes, I certainly understand where you're coming from with this, and it is something that the school has to help. And we can't do, the school can't do everything, you know. Yes, we understand that, but this is something that the school has to help with, especially in cases where homes fall short. So it's our expectation that, you know, teachers and principal would help to impart some of these values on a regular basis. You have to intentionally design school activities that would help to get the message across. Principals and teachers have to do a lot of talking, a lot of encouraging and giving suggestions, because our kids sometimes don't know what is expected of them. We have to model some of these values, if you could say it that way. You know, so the school has a role to play. The school definitely has a role to play in helping the kids to correct these things. We have to talk to them about it, to tell them that these things are not acceptable. This is not how you behave on the street. You know, anyway for that matter. Something that I noticed too is that we have, you know, young people, adults, you know, walking to the street, eating these icicles or these ice lollies, whatever you call them, snow cones.
Yes.
And it bothers me when I see our school children in uniform in particular doing this type of thing. And I remember distinctly that was one of the things we had to root it out from students coming to Sandy Point High School. They were not supposed to be caught on the street eating these icicles and so on like that, you know. But we see a lot of adults do it, and our young people just think that it is the right thing to do, and they do it.
So they're following the adults.
They're following the adults, and so our adults have to take blame for a lot of, you know, the type of behavior that we get from our young people.
Right, now while we are on that, now school is out.
Not quite.
And, well, not quite, but for administrators and so on,
yes.
That is not, but for the students, the high school students and the primary school students, school is out. And, you know, there's always that old saying that the devil finds work for idle hands. And sometimes, of course, you know, parents are at work and the children are at home. Some of them are left to roam the streets and all that sort of thing. And there's a lot of, you know, unproductive activity basically taking place. Does the school plan or have plans to put in place anything for our children during this time?
Okay, I would make reference to a little bit to that, and then Dr. Ezell would say what we are looking at in the future. But right now, what we would like to do is to encourage the students to get enrolled and participate in the various summer camps that are organized by different agencies, the Ministry of Community Affairs, churches, and other private institutions or individuals are organizing summer camps. And it is we would like to encourage the parents to get the students, the children, enrolled in these. I know the Methodist Church, for example, is doing Vacation Bible School and summer camps and so on, and it's a good way to keep the children engaged because they do meaningful activities. They can't, well, there are times when they would not be able to attend the camp because the camps are not available, but the students have to be encouraged to do some academic work over this long 8-week period. It's a long time to be out of an educational environment, formal educational environment. And so parents are encouraged to go to the bookstores, to Law's bookstore in particular, and buy these workbooks. Some of them are called bridge books. So you're linking from one grade to the other, you're linking from primary to secondary. And I'm telling you, using my US experience here, during the summer, all of these books, Barnes and Noble and all these bookstores, they run out of those material. And I've seen some of the very same books at Law's bookstore. There are math workbooks, there are reading, comprehension, grammar, and so on. And children should be able to work through those during the summer. They still have time to play and relax and so on, but to keep in tune for the next academic year, these workbooks would serve a very good purpose. But Dr. Ezell would say what the ministry is looking at in the future.
Yes, so summer and what to do with our children. First, before we talk about the Ministry of Education and any efforts that we have for summer, I do want to make a point. We've been talking about some serious issues prior, about the need for a shift in our way of thinking. And I think that if we reflect on the past few years, there should have been enough incidences involving our children coming to harm that should have made people pause and begin to reflect on the fact that our culture is changing. That no longer can we stop and think that these things don't happen here. Because the reality is they do. And I can tell you that they've happened here for a very long time. Mm-hmm. Maybe some of the cases haven't been quite as well known, but as a coordinator for guidance and counseling for many years, I know of a lot of cases, and persons who work in child welfare and probation and social development can tell you of a lot of cases. And recognizing that our culture is shifting, recognizing that we need to take more care with our children, means that people need to begin to reconsider how our children spend our summer. It is no longer okay to say they're old enough to stay at home. What happens when they stay at home? In the US and in other parts of the world, we have the term latchkey kid. Mm-hmm. Well, we may not use that here, but we have it nonetheless. And while I recognize that sometimes it can seem that camps are limited, or sometimes it may seem that there are barriers due to cost, there are quite a few camps in St. Kitts and Nevis which are free of cost, completely, entirely free of cost. And so I think parents do need to make a little bit more effort to find those activities which their children can participate in. Because to say we will leave them at home and they will be okay, I don't know that that's true anymore. And so we really need to stop, reflect, and examine what we do with our children for 8 weeks. Now, in terms of summer and how the Ministry of Education would like to approach it, there's one thing I'd like to accomplish, and that is the introduction of summer school as part of the Ministry of Education's program. Now, when I began in terms of envisioning summer school, I recognized that for me, a lot of it comes out of that extension of the student support services that we'd like to offer. Remember, we talked about how do we ensure that children don't just move from grade to grade.
Yes.
And so in other parts of the world where summer school is offered, there is a huge remediation component for summer school. It gives students an opportunity to fill in skills and knowledge gaps in core subject areas, making them better prepared for future academic success in the following year. That's one format for summer school. But as you examine summer school now, we recognize that summer school in most places offer more than that. They also offer lots of fun activities, lots of activities that expose children to the arts, to science, to opportunities to learn new skills that they may not otherwise be exposed through to the regular curriculum. And so as we begin to reflect on where we want to go in the future, and this of course is a medium to long-term goal, because introducing something like summer school is a major cultural shift.
It is.
It's a major cultural shift, and it would take a degree of commitment. I define commitment differently than interest. We have a lot of interest in things, but the difference between commitment and interest is that commitment involves action. And so it means that we would have to invest heavily financially in order to have summer school here. It means that people, adults, would have to be willing to give of their time to work with children.
Yes.
And it means that parents, especially those parents whose children might be asked to attend summer school for remediation purposes, would be willing to have that happen and do the work required to ensure success for that remediation program. And then of course there's always the fun component as well, because summer school should never be a burden. And we don't want children to burn out in summer. We want them to come back to school refreshed. So whatever we do in the future with respect to summer school, it would have that healthy balance of shoring up knowledge and skill gaps and exposing children to new and different things.
I was just going to intervene when you spoke about the burnout, because one of the things probably you will hear is too much school.
Yeah.
Too much school. And sometimes, sometimes we are developing a culture now, it's like school is a waste of time. I've heard that. Some people say after they leave high school and so on, it's a waste of time to go to CFBC. It's just wasting my time. Is education really a waste of time? Probably because the values somehow are shifting. We're becoming a very materialistic society, very consumeristic society. And, education is something that it's long term. You have to work at it, and so on and so on. And sometimes people are looking some easy routes out. It's to make quick money. It's to, it's to get rich. It's to buy a nice frock for your daughter to go to a prom, or your son to go to a prom, and so on. And we are seeing this sort of, shift and so on in terms of values and so on. Nothing brings it out more, I think, than, you see these proms. When I was growing up and so on, we never used to have these elaborate graduations and proms and all this sort of thing. And yes, people do achieve, and we have to celebrate the achievement. But sometimes this sort of over-the-top kind of thing does not really match the achievement.
Yes,
what do you have to say about that?
I'll come in first.
Yeah.
Education can't be a waste of time. It could never be a waste of time. It's education that makes us who we are.
That's right.
As people of St. Kitts and Nevis and people in general. CFBC is a place where our persons or young people graduating from high school can go to further their education immediately. Right now we are beginning to prepare, we have begun to prepare, we're getting ready to start the pre-service training next week. I'll say something about that later. In my day coming out of high school, everybody was heading to induction course to look for a teaching job out to the police force or some other avenue, as the case may be. But nowadays, most of our students are heading to CFB because the C-Sec subjects that you're going to get at FIFAM, they're going to get you highly qualified for the jobs. You're not going to be very competitive, and marketable. You're not going to be marketable and competitive. So you have to get as much education at the high level as possible. So for those persons who are thinking that education is a waste of time, is for those persons who may, as you said, just want to make a quick buck and so on. The piece about the extravagance in terms of preparing for proms and so on, I'll let the chief comment on that.
I see, you've left the challenging one for me. What will I say? You know what? I do want to reiterate the point that education is never a waste of time. Certainly, I do also want to make the point that education happens both formally and informally. So
Yes.
whether or not we choose to go into a formal institution after leaving secondary school, education can still happen.
Sure.
And I never want us to forget that. And there are many opportunities for education, whether you go on to one of our tertiary institutions or whether you take on the challenge privately through exploration of books, articles, materials. So I encourage all people to recognize that there is value in simply knowing, understanding. It makes you a better, well-rounded individual. It makes it better able for you to have discourse with other persons, and it changes your worldview, and it changes the way in which you experience the world. So that's my little
Yes.
input there with respect to education and its value. Now, in terms of our culture and, graduations and proms, I mean, certainly I think that is an ever-growing and changing phenomenon here. And certainly you can see it in other parts of the world. And I think in other parts of the world and here, graduations and proms will always be big. And that is because I think it is intrinsic in human nature to celebrate transitions, to mark milestones. And leaving secondary school for many is a major milestone.
Yes.
It wasn't so long ago that everybody didn't go to secondary school. And so
But it's
now,
not just high school now, leaving
yeah.
preschool.
I'm gonna get to that. But I want us to understand in that context that having our children have this opportunity, and being able to celebrate those milestones, I think it has its importance. I think what we have to look at and guard against is the degree of extravagance that goes into the planning and execution and participation in those events. You can participate in a prom without being completely extravagant. And we have to have values. One of the things that we have to think about when raising children is for them to understand the value of hard work and the value of the dollar. Children must understand that when we work hard, we are able to afford things, but that every dollar earned should not be a dollar spent. We have to guard against having children develop values that are consumer based, and we want our children to think about investing in themselves, investing in their future, be it educationally and financially. And so I think for any parent whose child is graduating, who's looking at a prom, certainly marking that milestone, that's a lovely thing for a family to do. But the degree of money that you want to spend on that, well, it's just my point of view. But I do think we need to limit the spending somewhat, because those same children may transition onto our tertiary institutions in a few months, and they will need books and uniforms. They will need extra classes. They will need extra study material outside of maybe what's in the school. And for those that are venturing off into work, you know what? They're going to need a basic work appropriate wardrobe. Each of these things are expensive, so whether your child will enter the world of work or will enter a tertiary institution, there is money to be spent after graduation, and it is a significant sum. So I would say a wise and prudent parent would mark the milestone, but watch the budget.
Okay, good. Now, it's time to go to the phone lines.
Well, before we go to the phone lines, can I just give a quick rundown of some things that are happening soon within education? Yes?
Sure, go right
Okay.
ahead. Yes.
We have a very busy summer ahead of us. Next week, Monday, we start our pre-service training, from which we would recruit our newest teachers. It is our aim to recruit the best quality of our teachers. We are looking for persons to come into education with, CAPE subjects, with degrees and high qualifications. We don't want to get the the bottom of the barrel, so to speak. We have a number of very able resource persons who would be teaching the courses during the pre-service. This is running from the 10th to the 21st of July from 8:30 to 3 o'clock for that 2-week period, and it's going to be held at the Fitzroy Bryan College. On Tuesday, which will be the 11th, we have a round table for our principals, the primary school principals. We did one for the secondary school principals early in the school year. But this is an opportunity to get our principals together to look at the school year in review for one part of it, to look at the nuts and bolts of, principalship and management and supervision in their schools. We want to really sharpen the toolkits of our principals. Talking about sharpening the toolkits of the principals, most of them have just completed a course with the University of the West Indies Open Campus here in St. Kitts, focusing on supervision and management. And so on Thursday the 13th, we are celebrating those principals with a dinner at OTI. We in the ministry, we want to be enthusiastic about the success of our teachers and principals, and this is one of the reasons why we are doing this. In talking about celebrating our teachers, the longest serving teacher in St. Kitts was recognized by Rotary last weekend. She is Mrs. Mavis Armstrong, who is a counselor at the Virtual High School. And that for us was...
How many years?
41.
41
years and still going strong. The summer workshops are coming up for our teachers. This was a form of support that was mentioned earlier. We are making some changes to have our teachers spend more time in training that first week when they come back. As a result, we have set aside the first 2 days, the 4th and the 5th of September, for teachers to be in their schools, getting their classrooms ready, decorating their classrooms, beginning to prepare their lessons, writing up the registers and stuff like that, as a means of getting to a stage where they are ready for the kids when the kids come back. So on September 4th and 5th, teachers are in their schools, getting their schools ready. And on the 6th, which is the Wednesday, this is going to be unusual. So we want parents to take note of this. On Wednesday the 6th, that's when all the school children would report back. It's a day when kids are going to move straight into instruction. We're no longer giving a half day to the secondary schools, which was somewhat traditional. Basse High School students are expected to report on the 4th because they have a special assembly to mark the 50th anniversary of the Basse High School. In fact, the 4th of September is the anniversary date, and so that's why they would come back on that date. On the 5th, all high school students are expected to report to their respective high schools for orientation. So the teachers are going to be there the day before, and the high schoolers would come in on the 5th to get some orientation, meet their new teachers, get a temporary timetable, get their classroom set up, and generally understanding what's going to happen for the school year. So there are some changes, and we want parents to be apprised of these. Letters should have been sent home from their principals, or they will be sent home from their principals. And near the time when school would reopen, we would make some further announcements as it relates to these. Yes, so we'll.
Okay, so we are going to go to the phone lines.
Yes.
If there's anyone who wants to call in, the lines will be open. Just now, the numbers to call, the local number is 465-2555, the local number 465-2555, and the overseas number is 1-718-577-2916. That's 1-718-577-2916. We welcome your calls. Working for you, good afternoon.
Very pleasant afternoon to you, sir, your guests, and all your listeners. I want to direct a question to your panelists, with respect to the probability, the possibility, or the feasibility of restructuring the educational system that currently exists within not only the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, but it expands much wider, far wider within the Caribbean area, especially the OECS region, whereby we have an education system that is geared towards teaching people only academics, whereby, to me, some students are oblivious, they're unaware of why they go to school. I believe that it should start from the home, and very early within the school system, students should be indoctrinated as to why they attend school, especially the high school level, because they go to school, they do all different subjects, come out with sometimes 22 subjects, 17 subjects, 19 subjects, and how practicable, how much do they use those subjects with respect to how much do they need all those subjects. So in other words, if you're going to study 22 subjects, you're going to get 17 or 20 passes. You should make those subjects, you should be able to make those subjects work for you. It should be practical. And that is exactly what I'm saying. So I'm talking about restructuring the system, whereby if you have somebody who is good at maths, you let them focus on that. Somebody who's good at physics, chemistry, biology, they focus on the sciences. And the people who are good at arts, they focus on the arts. They develop their skills at the individual or the collective subjects that they're good at, and you more or less train them and prepare them for the field of work within that scope, within that sphere. And I believe that if we do more of that, our education system will be a lot better. It will be much more improved. For instance, you have a situation where accounts and economics are not taught at the secondary school level, and I believe that that is a negative, that is a minus. We need to introduce accounts, teaching of accounts and economics at the high school level within the Eastern Caribbean, the OECS region especially.
Okay,
and not wait for people to leave school to pursue studies in accounts and economics. Those are very essential and critical fundamental subjects that should be taught to students from a very early age.
Caller.
So I would listen off as the panelists respond. Have a blessed evening, sir.
Thank you. Working for you, good afternoon. Good afternoon,
Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to the panel. Carl Brown here. Good afternoon to the listening public home and abroad. Guys, I want to and hope that you all would address a couple of matters here for me that I would like to see discarded from the school sort of curriculum. One, folks, the sending home of sponsor paper and sending students out for sponsor for walkathon, field, school athletics things and so for the school. Guys, I think you all should abandon that. Here, my idea while abandoning that. The school, they teach metal craft in the school. The school can get these metal craft that they do, sell them to the communities and the public. They do woodwork, the same thing they can do with whatever stuff they make. The other idea is the school have students, teachers, security officers, and all sorts of people. These people are very talented people. You can put on talent shows, you can put on monologues, you can put on calypso shows, screen shows, and the school can raise its own funds from there. The other thing, my good friend Mr. Hodge, I hope that you and the ministry are seriously looking into the security of school. Mr. Hodge, you would have heard me say this on many talk shows. The days of shot and pants and design on top of shirt mark security, those days are long gone, Mr. Hodge. We are to get very serious with security. The security officers at school, Mr. Hodge, should have scanners. They should have they should arm in some form and ways to stop and to eliminate all sorts of things coming into the school by the own school students, teachers, and everybody else. And what plans do the ministry have to eliminate gangs in school and potential past students and other community people that comes to the school and hang around the school to recruit the students as gang members. Go on, guys.
Okay.
Okay, we can respond firstly to the first caller. And I want to begin by saying that accounts or accounting and economics, principles of business, these are actually
Taught in
schools. Okay. Now, I agree with some of what he said. Our education system in the Caribbean, in St. Kitts Nevis and in the Caribbean, have undergone some changes, some major changes. We in St. Kitts Nevis are beginning to unfold a TVET project. CDB has given us a loan, part of it is loan, part is grant, to work on improving the TVET subjects in our secondary schools and at the tertiary level. And that definitely, when that begins to roll out, it's going to definitely transform the face of education in St. Kitts and Nevis. Part of it is going to be physical expansion of our secondary schools to provide for the skill areas, plumbing, carpentry, masonry, and all those subjects, or all those technical skills that we definitely going to need to move our country forward in terms of tourism and even for our own country development. We are beginning to identify, we are looking for people, teachers and other interested persons to train in these areas. We are offering scholarships to go to do degrees and other levels of qualifications. So we are moving forward. There are changes that would come with the introduction of the expansion of the TVET program in schools.
Yes, I'd also like to add additionally that the initial caller would have spoken to the idea of students studying subjects according to their interest. What I would like to say at this juncture is that is currently being done in our schools. So if a student has an interest in the sciences, they can focus heavily in the sciences. If a student has an interest in mathematics, they can pile up in that area that supports mathematics. So this idea that students are restricted to this purely academic course of study is long gone. I also want to challenge this idea of academic versus non-academic, because it is something that I find very troubling, and I think is really at the heart of one of the issues that we have. All forms of study are academic. You know, earlier I talked about my training, and I said in psychology we have applied and we have experimental. Well, when we talk about TVET, it's academic. It's simply applied. Okay? You take mathematics and you create something. Okay? So you can study mathematics as a pure math. Okay? And that might be seen as academic. But when I build something, when I construct something, when I wire something, that's chemistry, that's physics, that's math.
And the theory is
Applied.
there as well.
And the theory is there. So I think that culturally, we need to have a shift in how we view education. And I have to say that parents, you've got to get more involved. When children enter secondary school, the parents come for the first few meetings, and then they disappear and come back in fifth form. Maybe end of fourth form if they're worried about them going to fifth form. But here's the thing. During first form and second form, students throughout the various secondary schools will be exposed to a whole host of subjects, with the idea being that they will choose a focus as they go into third form. But where will that focus come from? Who is going to guide them? Now, of course, the Ministry of Education is focusing on making sure that we build a program of career services and career development into that early secondary school experience to give more guidance to students in terms of developing the areas of interest and the areas of strength. You know, because you have an interest and then you have strengths.
You don't have to, right?
Okay? But parents need to be as involved in this process. Yes, they're young, but you need to start talking to your children about what interests you. Because there's nothing better than making a living doing something you love. But in order for children to identify that, we must have active conversations about how was school today? What subject do you like? What teacher did you like? What comes easy for you? What comes hard for you? And begin to think about how we're going to support our children so that when the decision-making time comes, they're choosing subjects that would lend themselves to what they might want to do in the future. So certainly career service is something that we're looking to build on, and it's a focus for my office this coming academic year. We're also going to be holding a whole host of secondary school meetings with principals, working with principals to look at the programming at the first and second form level, to speak directly to this issue of subject offerings and how to get children focused more on identifying their strengths and areas of interest. Further, I just want to say finally that as we look at education, as we move forward in terms of restructuring education, whether we do it nationally or regionally, I think we need to think about what is the long-term goal for education. I think it would have been said and alluded to that we have a whole bunch of students who come out with all of these subjects, and what does it mean?
22.
22 was mentioned, right? Yes, the 22 subjects. And sometimes, you know, people talk about, especially when they talk about TVET, you know, training people for careers. And I think people forget that the average age of the student leaving secondary school is roughly 16 and 17. Now, I'm sorry, but when I was 16 and 17, that's when I started thinking about what I wanted to do. And we're saying that our children are supposed to have left secondary school having figured it out. Personally, I think that's an unrealistic expectation. And we have to recognize that our children are on a journey. They're still very young when they exit secondary school. They're still learning who we are. So yes, it's possible to come out without 22 subjects and not necessarily have a clear direction. What you know is what you like and what you're interested in. And so I think, last thing, education, the goal of education as far as I'm concerned, is to teach a child how to think.
Well, I think, Dr. Esdale, that you have hit the nail on the head. When I was going to school, the maximum number of subjects that you did was around 8 subjects.
Yeah.
You needed 5 to move on.
Yeah.
And so on. I basically feel, that is my thinking, that there's big competition among the schools in terms of who can gain most subjects. And for me, I don't think it's a healthy competition, Because what you have happening is that you have a number of students doing all of these subjects, the 22 and the 17, and all of that sort of a thing. But really and truly, where are you going to use them? And sometimes what I have found, having taught at the CFBC, is that some of these students who come in with all of these subjects are not necessarily the best students. Students come in with less subjects, but yet their ability to think critically surpasses those with 22 and 20.
Yeah. Our school system does not cater for persons to carry all that many subjects. So what has been happening is that a number of the students, their parents, would have the students do these classes in a private arrangement and so on. But I want to say something, especially to the first caller. I think when a child graduates high school in St. Kitts, for the time being, to me, the product is a better quality of student compared to some high school graduates that I encountered in the United States.
Yeah.
I taught at a community college, and basically they were students from high school who came to my class. And I would always compare them to the quality of reformers that came out of Sandy Point High School when I was there. I think our students are, they're well-rounded. They're more of a generalist. They have a certain amount of knowledge about a variety of subjects.
True.
I think compared to the U.S. counterparts, who are too much in a specialized area, a straight jacket type of thing, our students from the Caribbean have a broader base. And when they go, students from the Caribbean who go on to American universities, they do extremely well. They do extremely well. And I want to say something about AVEC here. That AVEC institution is one that we are working towards developing into what we call the National Training Institute. That's where we're heading with that. Right now we have a task force that is putting the amalgamation of the tertiary level institutions for technical vocational education. So the TVET as a institution is doing an excellent job in beginning to provide our young people with the skills and training that they're going to need to build this country. The people with the skills are the persons they're going to make more money than us who have these degrees behind our names. All right, and you can, if you want to get a degree in a technical and vocational subject, the opportunities are there. We need to respond to Carl quickly. I want to say to Carl that schools have to raise funds. Yeah, I think sometimes we actually get out of control when it comes to raising funds. In fact, the chief will tell you that last term I was ready to say no school should have any fundraising event because we wanted them to focus on instruction. But the kids have to raise funds. He mentioned about the sponsor paper. I know exactly what he's talking about. That was something that started with the late Rosabelle Warner when she was head teacher at Irish Town and later at Sandy Point. It's called a sponsored spelling. Kids are given X number of words. Grade 6 are already given 50 words to learn to spell. And words that are challenging. They're not from the ordinary, spelling words. You know something? I took that idea to the United States. The first year we did it, the school brought in $34,000 US. And my principal was amazed. He wanted to know where that idea came from. He thought the event would bring in $3,000-4,000. $34,000. So even in the great United States, they are raising funds in school, but we have to control it. Right? And parents have to monitor that type of thing. You have to know who your children are soliciting sponsors from. I would say go to your godparents, go to your uncle, go to your aunt. Your aunt, your uncle are not going to tell you anything out of the way when you go to ask them for a sponsor. All right?
Yes.
We want to say to Carl that we have identified a task force that we're going to put together to study security as it relates to violence and so on in our school. So the ministry is thinking about it. Scanners are already in use, and yes, the gang culture, we're going to have to do a lot more education. We're going to have to do a lot more teaching. The guidance counselors during the summer would be involved in drug intervention training, drug rehabilitation intervention and training and so on. And we are hoping that they could see the connection between the formation of gangs and drugs and that type of thing. So it is for us a very serious matter that we have to give a lot more attention to. I don't know if the chief wants to
Yes,
add.
we're almost out of time, but before we leave, I wanted Dr. Esdell to speak a little bit in terms of school placement and zoning, and then we can wrap up.
Yes.
Yes. A hot button topic at the Ministry of Education always,
Yeah.
and particularly at this time of the year. I do want to make a plea to parents. Our education system was devised in such a way that children are intended to go to school where they live. Look around the island. There is a primary school in every community. And that was intended so that children would go to the school nearest to where they live. And those schools feed into particular secondary schools. One of the challenges that we have is that we have this idea of ideal or preferred schools. And that means that by and large, persons are trying to get into the Bastyr zone. There's a preference for Bastyr over other schools. Now, where this comes from, I don't know. But here's what I do know. The number of students within those schools is extremely large, both at the primary and the secondary level. Because people see, if I can get my kid into that primary school, then they will most likely go into that secondary school. And what we're saying this year and in all the coming years is that we're going to be taking a very hard look at making sure that children actually go to school where they reside, because it is in the best interest of everyone. There is nothing more disheartening than when a person moves and it's September and their child lives close enough to a school to throw a rock at it, and you tell them, you cannot go. There is no room. They're over capacity. Why? Because children from halfway around the island are taking up a seat in that classroom. And I think that oftentimes people don't recognize the impact of their actions on everyone else. So we really are making a plea to please make sure that you register your children where they reside. We do allow for people to make out-of-zone requests. You can do so by writing into the Ministry of Education, and then we follow up with you. Of course, you will be asked to provide supporting documents to support the request. So there is that mechanism if there are special circumstances.
Yes, I noticed that too many kids are going to schools out of their zone. Coming to work from Sandy Point, I'm seeing children in uniform from almost every school in Bastyr. And I want to ask the parents, why is it you want to get your children into a school in Bastyr? I'm talking not as the permanent secretary now, but as a former principal of Sandy Point High School. I created a school, a culture with the staff, the help of my staff, where we excelled in academics, athletics. We were high school champions for 8 years in a row, straight. Debating, drama. And sometimes when I to compare schools, we were the most successful high school at the time.
I know, but probably the parents now are going to say, well, look, this is my child, and I have a right to decide where my child and what school my child will be educated at.
But I think the laws, the school
Right.
regulations would speak differently to that. Our concept is built on the neighborhood concept.
Yes, we have a design that is based upon a community school design and a feeder school system. So you have community primary schools, and they feed into specific secondary schools. That is a design that we have, and we have it for very clear reasons. We talk about safety, and we talk about the challenges that are presented in schools. Well, add 300 extra kids into a school from throughout the island, and you do have a problem with security. Because what have you done? You swell the school population so much that it's hard to keep track of who's coming in, who's coming out, and what they're carrying.
True.
So we have to recognize that the number of children in the school has implications for all kinds of things, for school safety, for teacher allocation, for school supply and resource allocation, for personal attention and care. A teacher can care and provide instruction much more ably to 20-something students as opposed to 32, as opposed to 15. You know, so numbers matter. And we have this idea of, well, this is a better school. But what is it based on? And oftentimes it's based on a bygone notion, a reality that maybe no longer exists because things have changed and the climate within our schools have changed, and positively and negatively, and that's throughout the island. And I would say that there is no preferred high school. All of our high schools have strong programs. All of our high schools have great teachers. All of our high schools have carefully chosen principals who we work with closely and try to support. Any school that you choose in this country, secondary or primary, will afford your child a good quality education.
I think probably there's some sort of a imported culture, because, for example, in places like Jamaica, where I studied
Right.
and so on, and Trinidad and so on, they have this thing about competition among schools. This is a very good school. If you go to that school, it is deemed a very bright school, and that school is a very done school, and so on. So in Trinidad, for example, you go to St. Mary's College, or you go to St. Joseph's College, and in Jamaica and so on, if you probably go to Kingston College and some of the other colleges and so on, you're bright.
Yeah.
We get that.
You know, and that sort of thing. So maybe it is that sort of a culture that is trying to creep its way into St. Kitts and so on. And the other thing, I know we're out of time, is that some parents are very disruptive in their children's education.
Yeah.
Yes.
For example, so they keep pulling their child from one school
To the next.
because they don't like that teacher,
Yes.
and they don't like so, and they send the child to another school, and the child keeps rolling, and it's very disruptive,
Yes, we do see that quite a bit, yes.
you know. So, but we are out of time, and you know, is there anything that you would like to say in closing, though?
You know, in closing, for me, I just want to say that while it is the end of the school year, as our peers would have said, this is a period for a mix of fun and a bit of work. A lot can be lost over the summer, and we want all children to return to school with a great start. And part of having that great start is making sure that our children keep up with their academics. You can do that formally through the purchase of workbooks, like was said, but you can do it informally by simply handing your child a book. The act of reading is enough to keep that little mind going. You improve your literacy, you improve your comprehension, you improve your understanding of the written word, and that will have positive impact in the coming school year. So whether you diligently work through workbooks or you just pick up a few good books, make sure that your child is engaged in something positive and make sure that it has some educational value.
Yes,
I'm closing out my first school year as Permanent Secretary for Education. I think that I have not achieved all that I wanted to do for this school year, but I think I still have
you've achieved a lot.
a little time to do it. But yes, education has a lot to do. We are always very busy, and we have a number of initiatives, as we said, coming on stream. So we want to extend a word of thanks publicly to our school administrators and teachers for the hard work they have done throughout the year, and we have our closing out principals meeting tomorrow, so we would use the opportunity again to thank them. But publicly we would want to encourage them to begin to plan for their schools in the new school year. I did say to the principals that some of us are 10-month employees, but most of us are 12-month employees because we get paid over the vacation,
Yes.
and so we expected to do
Sure.
some work to focus on the new school year. We want to encourage the parents to make sure that the children are not left unsupervised, unattended throughout the summer. We are living in a time that is dangerous, and we have to make sure that our children and young people are supervised. Somebody's responsible for knowing where they are. All right, so we want to say thank you for the opportunity to make our case and to share all the good things that is happening in the Ministry of Education.
Well, I want to thank both of you. Dr. Esdale, it was your first time,
Yes.
but wow, what a wealth of knowledge and
information.
so on and information in the area of education, and we certainly would like to have you back
Well-
on this program.
Thank you for having me, and I would be happy to come back and talk about
Mm-hmm.
education anytime.
Well, thank you so much. And P.S. Hodge, you're a veteran. We've had you before,
Yes.
and we are going to have you again. And some, the Ministry of Education will be featured, I think, on this program in the not too distant future again.
Yes.
So I want to thank you for coming,
You're very
and
welcome.
thank you for sharing with, people in St. Kitts and Nevis
And-
and the
and-
people all over the world
That's
in,
right.
in the diaspora. Okay, so I want to thank all of the people who listened to today's program, those of you who called in and gave feedback or asked questions. We thank you very much. Next week we will be back for another Working for You on Wednesday from 1:30 to 3 p.m. I hope that you would have a very good day, and I am your host, Les Roy Williams. Thank you for listening.
Working for you. A weekly talk radio program which highlights developments of national interest and the activities of your St. Kitts Nevis government. Join host Les Roy Williams as he presents news, views, reports, and interviews about everything regarding the activities of the Team Unity government and the building of our communities and the development of St. Kitts Nevis. Tune in and call in to interact with your government and share your views regarding the upward forward development of your community and our beautiful Twin Island Federation. Working for You is weekly, every Wednesday live from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on ZIZ Radio, Win FM, and Sugar City FM with rebroadcast on participating stations. Working for You.